On August 15, 1971, 50 years ago, President Richard Nixon delivered a dramatic 18-minute national television address. It was a Sunday. He announced, number one, that the dollar was being decoupled from gold. The dollar would no longer be redeemable in gold. Number two, that a floating exchange rate system would replace the existing fixed exchange rate international monetary system. And number three, that a temporary wage and price freeze would be instituted in the United States, which quickly became phases 1, 2, and 3 drastic austerity measures. Although Nixon announced these measures purportedly to rein in financial speculation against the dollar, they in fact opened the floodgates to the most massive, lengthy, speculative binge in the history of mankind, coupled with physical economic collapse, which continues to this day.
Accordingly, I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to take the action necessary to defend the dollar against the speculators. I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States. In full cooperation with the International Monetary Fund and those who trade with us, we will press for the necessary reforms to set up an urgently needed new international monetary system. Stability and equal treatment is in everybody's best interest. I am determined that the American dollar must never again be a hostage in the hands of international speculators. The time has come for exchange rates to be set straight and for the major nations to compete as equals. There is no longer any need for the United States to compete with one hand tied behind her back.
Nixon's speech was followed by the Azores International Monetary Conference in 1972, which officially ended the fixed rate system, and later by the 1999 cancellation of FDR's Glass-Steagall Act, which put the last nail in the coffin. Nixon's action unleashed an international speculative feeding frenzy that has today driven total speculative financial instruments, such as derivatives, up into the range of $2 quadrillion. That's a 2 followed by 15 zeros. To be sure, there have been other speculative bubbles throughout history, such as the Dutch tulip mania of 1634 to 1638, the Mississippi bubble, 1719 and 20, and the South Sea bubble of 1720. But they were all smaller and shorter in duration than today's monstrosity. Nixon's announcement of August 15, 1971, was the most far-reaching and catastrophic economic policy decision of the 20th century, in terms of its consequences down to the present. One economist, and one economist alone, called it. He warned that it was coming, he explained what it meant within hours of its announcement, and he spent the next 5 decades warning that if those policies were continued, the world would head into a systemic breakdown crisis and the likelihood of fascist economic policies. All the while, he presented detailed programs to reverse the crisis based on the idea of peace through development and on fostering the productive powers of labor of every person on the planet. That man was Lyndon LaRouche. LaRouche was reviled and unjustly imprisoned for 5 years for these efforts. His policies were not implemented in the transatlantic sector, and the planet today is paying the price for that folly in the form of a hyperinflationary blowout, an uncontrolled and deadly pandemic, and the danger of thermonuclear war. As a result of the campaign to defame LaRouche and silence his ideas, although you have probably heard of LaRouche, odds are that you haven't actually read anything that he wrote or studied his writings seriously. But some people, leading scientists and political leaders in different parts of the world, did listen to LaRouche and did study his works. from the Russian scientific giant Pobisk Kuznetsov, to former Mexican President José López Portillo, to former Italian economics minister Giulio Tremonti. The LaRouche Legacy Foundation is proud to announce that on Saturday, August 14th, 50 years after Nixon's fateful announcement, it will hold an international seminar featuring such leading thinkers. You will be able to hear from them directly about LaRouche's economic breakthroughs, about his unmatched record of forecasts, and about his programmatic proposals to develop every corner of the planet and the solar system. The seminar will help you understand why it is past time to exonerate LaRouche's ideas, both for reasons of simple justice and to be able to at last implement his policies. Where were you 50 years ago on August 15th, 1971? Where will you be 50 years from today? Although there are very few individuals alive on the planet today who will personally experience those two dates, 50 years ago and 50 years hence, it is nonetheless the proper standpoint from which every individual should locate his identity, just as LaRouche did. What caused Nixon's August 15, 1971 announcement? LaRouche warned, going back as far as his forecasts of 1959 and 60, that if the policies associated with prominent monetarist economist Arthur Burns continued deep into the 1960s, we must expect a series of crises in the existing monetary system during the second half of that decade. If those policies continued, LaRouche warned, despite the warning shots of the monetary crises, there would be a general collapse of the existing Bretton Woods system. The policies that were implemented, especially after the 1963 assassination of JFK, fueled the speculative bubble and the takedown of the industrial economy exactly as LaRouche had warned would happen. The policies of the University of Chicago's Milton Friedman were implemented with a vengeance by the Nixon administration, under the advice of the likes of Arthur Burns, George Shultz, and Paul Volcker. Friedman had called explicitly for unpegging the dollar from gold. Quote, "Set the dollar free by stopping pegging the dollar." Closed quote. And in the months leading up to August 15, 1971, Arthur Burns, by then the head of the Federal Reserve Bank, was making frantic phone calls to Wall Street banks, promising that the Fed would provide as much money as needed, as soon as they needed it. From dead zero, the rate of money supply growth jumped to 13%. It was the 1970s version of quantitative easing. While LaRouche was warning publicly that a blowout was imminent, all of the leading economic luminaries were busy guaranteeing the opposite. Said Arthur Burns in 1969, and I quote, "Financial crises, which frequently disrupted economic life in earlier times, no longer exacerbate our troubles." Close quote. George Shultz, director of the Office of Management and Budget, stated on May 10, 1971, quote, "When Nixon came into office, others said the inflationary thrust could never be contained without a virtual takeover of a major economic activity or a major depression. It was, and without either." Close quote. And then, of course, there was Paul Samuelson, the 1970 Nobel Prize winner, whose textbook, Economics, was studied by hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of hapless university economics students. He guaranteed, and this is a quote from his book, "The modern fiscal system has great inherent automatic stabilizing properties. All through the day and night, whether or not the president is to be found in the White House, the fiscal system is helping to keep our economy stable. If a recession should get underway while Congress was out of session, powerful automatic forces would go instantly into action to counteract it without the need for any committee meetings or for exercise of any human intelligence." Close quote. Perhaps the only thing we can agree with Samuelson on is that no human intelligence was in fact exercised. Lyndon LaRouche decided, as he saw the oncoming train wreck bearing down upon the United States, that it was time to demolish the academic reputations of these and other economists. He personally challenged what he called the quackademics to public debate, to demonstrate that their policies, of the Keynesians and the Friedmanites alike, were leading the world towards a new fascism, modeled on the concentration camp economics of Hitler's finance minister, Hjalmar Schacht. Perhaps the most famous of these was Lyndon LaRouche's debate with the country's leading Keynesian economist, Professor Abba Lerner, on December 2nd, 1971, before hundreds of students at Queens College in New York City, during which the liberal Lerner finally blurted out, quote, "But if Germany had accepted Schacht's policies, Hitler would not have been necessary." Close quote. Years later, Lerner's supposedly opposite number, Milton Friedman, also jumped to Schacht's defense in response to a question phoned in to a July 24th, 1978 Chicago radio show. Friedman said, quote, "Dr. Schacht cannot be held responsible for the crimes of the Nazis. Hitler's arise from monetary instability, and Schacht was a genius at preventing monetary instability. Had his policies succeeded, Hitler would not have come to power." Close quote. Both of these economists were merely following in the footsteps of Lord John Maynard Keynes himself, who praised Schacht's handiwork in the introduction to the 1937 German edition of his book, The General Theory. Quote, Keynes, "For I must admit that much in the following book was written and illustrated in reference to the situation in Anglo-Saxon countries. Nevertheless, the theory of production as a whole, which is the object of this book, can be much better adapted to the conditions of a totalitarian state than the theory of production and distribution of wealth under circumstances of free competition and a large measure of laissez-faire." What was Lyndon LaRouche's fundamental discovery in economics? LaRouche himself explained it as follows in 1993. Quote, "The central feature of my original contribution to the Leibniz science of physical economy is the provision of a method for addressing the causal relationship between, on the one side, individuals' contributions to axiomatically revolutionary advances in scientific and analogous forms of knowledge, and, on the other side, consequent increases in the potential population density of corresponding societies." Close quote. LaRouche developed a pedagogical graph to point students in the right direction. If a society's rates of growth of monetary and financial aggregates rise hyperbolically as the physical economy collapses, that system will sooner or later blow out. All schools of economics, other than the Leibniz School of Physical Economy, otherwise known as the American system of economics, focus exclusively on the two upper curves, absurdly thinking that problems can be foreseen and solved by merely monetarist manipulations. LaRouche used this scientific approach to issue 9 economic forecasts between 1956 and 1994, each of which was uniquely accurate, where every other living economist failed miserably. Then, on July 25, 2007, on the eve of the 2007-2008 crash, which others said would never happen, LaRouche told a stunned international webcast audience, quote, "The world monetary financial system is actually now currently in the process of disintegrating. There's nothing mysterious about this. I've talked about it for some time. It's been in progress, and it's not abating. What's listed as stock values and market values in the financial markets, internationally speaking, is bunk. These are purely fictitious beliefs. There's no truth to it. The fakery is enormous. There is no possibility of a non-collapse of the present financial system. None. Close quote. Within weeks, the interbank market froze completely, followed quickly by the Northern Rock and Bear Stearns blowouts, and then the Lehman Brothers collapse of September 2008. Throughout his life, LaRouche showed that the art of physical economy lies in fostering man's unique creativity to achieve nonlinear leaps in the productive powers of labor. He developed potential relative population density as the key metric, along with energy flux density, to track man's expanded power in the universe. In 1998, in the course of a presentation he made along with Helga Zepp-LaRouche in Mexico City, former President José López Portillo provided advice which guides the LaRouche Legacy Foundation's August 14, 2021 seminar. It is time for the world to listen to the wise words of Lyndon LaRouche.
Yo felicito a doña Helga por estas palabras.
I congratulate Doña Helga for these words,
Impresionaron especialmente,
which impressed me especially
primero
because first,
me encerraron en el Apocalipsis.
they trapped me in the apocalypse, but then she showed me the staircase by which we can get to a promised land.
Muchas gracias, doña
Many
Helga.
thanks, Doña Helga.
Doña Helga,
Doña Helga,
y en esto
and here
quiero felicitar
I wish
a
to
su
congratulate
esposo,
her husband,
Lyndon
Lyndon
LaRouche.
LaRouche,
y ahora es necesario que la sabia palabra de Lyndon LaRouche se escuche en el mundo.
and it is now necessary for the world to listen to the wise words of Lyndon LaRouche. Now it is through the voice of his wife as we have had the privilege of hearing.
Que es importante que nos ilustren respecto de lo que está pasando en el mundo.
How important that they enlighten us as to what is happening in the world, as to what will happen, and as to what can be corrected.
Que es importante que alguien dedique
How
su tiempo,
important
su
that someone dedicates their time,
y su
their generosity,
entusiasmo
and their
a ese
enthusiasm to
propósito.
that endeavor.
De mi parte, yo cumplí un periodo de responsabilidad
For my part, I fulfilled a period of responsibility,
de alguna manera dramática de lo que le ocurre
and I can report in a
a las
somewhat dramatic way
economías
what
nacionales
happens to national
en un
economies
orden
in an international financial order
internacional
such as
como
that
desde
which has
Bretton
ordered
Woods
our affairs since
nos
Bretton
rige.
Woods.